Welcome to Ancient Greece Today. My name is Naomi Weiss. I'm a professor of classics at Harvard University, and I am your host for this podcast series, which brings together scholars and artists to think about the ancient Greek world and its afterlives. Each episode, we first look at a piece of ancient Greek literature and then at an example of how it's been used and reimagined in the present day. This season is Tragedy Today. Last episode, we talked about Sophocles' Antigone. Now we move on to a different playwright, Euripides, the youngest of the big three being Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Euripides is often thought of as the most experimental of these three tragedians and the one who likes to engage most extensively with the hot topics and big intellectual trends of his day. That characterization isn't very fair to Aeschylus and Sophocles, not just because their own surviving plays can also show great innovation and high intellectual engagement, but also because the comparison isn't fair given what has survived. For Aeschylus and Sophocles, we have 7 full plays each. For Euripides, we have 19, including 1 satyr play. And for all 3 playwrights, the dramas that survive in full are just a small fraction of the many, many they produced in total. We have 3 episodes dedicated to Euripides. Today, we're going to talk about Medea, first performed in 431 BCE. In the next episode, we'll turn to Bacchae, and then in episode 8, we'll move on to Trojan Women. I have 2 wonderful guests today to discuss Medea, then and now. First, Professor Al Duncan, a colleague from UNC Chapel Hill, and then Rhodessa Jones, founder and director of the Medea Project, Theatre for Incarcerated Women. So, Medea. Let me give some background to the plot of this play, which the character of the nurse actually reminds us of at the start. Medea is a princess from Colchis, a non-Greek place by the Black Sea. She has divine ancestry. Her grandfather is Helios, the sun god. Jason of Jason and the Argonauts, showed up in Colchis wanting to get the golden fleece. Now Medea knows sorcery, magic, and she helped him get it. She also killed her brother, who tried to pursue them. They went on to Iolcus in Greece, where Jason brought the fleece to King Pelias. Pelias had promised him the throne if he'd get him the fleece, but of course he never thought that Jason would succeed. Pelias refused to give up the throne, so Medea used trickery and magic to induce his daughters to chop him up and cook him. She and Jason become exiles, and eventually they end up in Corinth. By this point, they have 2 sons. Euripides' play is set in Corinth. It begins with the nurse, as I said, and also with the sounds of Medea, her cries, her wails, since she has heard that Jason, her partner, her husband, has made an arrangement with the king of Corinth, Creon, to marry Creon's daughter. This after everything Medea has done for him. But Medea is very different when she actually comes on stage. She delivers a very calm, measured, famous speech addressing the chorus as woman of Corinth, detailing her situation and the plight of women in general. Her most memorable line, "I'd rather stand in battle 3 times than give birth once." Between choral songs, there follow a series of interactions between Medea and a series of men, Creon, the king, Jason, and Aegeus, king of Athens, who's on his way back from Delphi. Creon comes to announce to Medea that she must go into exile. She begs him to delay by just 1 day, give her 1 single day before expelling her from the city. There's not that much she can do in a day, right? He grudgingly agrees. Medea is furious with Jason when he comes on. Jason's a weak, very unlikable character in this play. He tries to convince her that it's really in their best interest that he go ahead with abandoning her and their children. When she sees Aegeus, She gets him to let her stay in Athens in exchange for giving him drugs to cure him and his wife of their infertility. When she next speaks to Jason, she changes tactics entirely. She's tearful, she feigns regret, she persuades him to let her send their sons to his bride with gifts in the hope that they might be spared exile. The old tutor comes on to announce success. The children can stay, even if their mother has to go. Medea delivers an ominous monologue, telling her sons, "You'll no longer see your mother with loving eyes." She tells them to go into the house. She kisses them. She exclaims in pain. She bids them inside again. We hear what happens next from a messenger. The gifts that the children brought the princess, a robe and a crown, were poisoned. The princess tried in vain to rip them off and died a terrible, bloody death. Her father died too. Creon came in, threw his arms around her, and then was glued to his daughter. He ripped his flesh when he tried to extract himself. But the tragedy's not over. Medea announces her intent to kill her children as she goes into the house. As the chorus sings, we hear their cries from inside. In comes Jason, demanding to see Medea. He doesn't know the full extent of what she's done yet. The chorus tells him she has killed his children. Medea comes back on stage, but this time she is in the chariot of her grandfather Helios, the sun god. She is her own deus ex machina. After a furious back and forth with Jason, where she insists on taking their sons' bodies with her, off she goes. Jason, that great hero Jason and the Argonauts, he's been reduced to nothing. No sons, no wife. She even foretells his ignominious death, struck on the head by a plank from his own ship. How do we respond to this powerful, incredibly influential play? We can think of it in the context of 5th century Athens, where women were generally quite secluded from public life, where Pericles, the great statesman of the mid-5th century, declared famously, quoted by Thucydides, that woman's greatest glory is to be least talked about by men. Well, in this context, Medea is a true nightmare. The case of a monstrous woman who refuses to be a non-entity, who acts like a man, like a male hero obsessed with honor and vengeance, like a male politician in her speeches, in her dealings with powerful men. She's also very much a mother, and that's why her infanticide is so very shocking. We may find her abhorrent, but we're also led to sympathize with her. Another way to think about Medea is in terms of her otherness, as a woman, as a non-Greek, as magical, as someone who transcends all boundaries, who even approaches the divine. So, this is a very complex character and a complex play. I asked Al Duncan, Associate Professor at UNC Chapel Hill, to join me to talk in more depth about Medea. I'm joined now by Al Duncan, who is an associate professor in the Department of Classics at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
Great.
Al's research has focused on ancient Greek and Roman theatre and its afterlife, especially questions to do with audiences' receptions, audiences' perceptions, valuations of theatre. Al is really at the forefront of thinking about ancient Greek plays as performances, and that's an approach that's close to my own heart. And for him, it's an approach, I think, that's informed by his work directing, producing, and acting in productions of classical drama too. His book, Ugly Productions and Aesthetics of Greek Drama, came out with University of Michigan Press last year, 2025. So I'm really excited to welcome Al to Ancient Greece today. Thank you for being here.
Oh, Naomi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be a part of this. This is a very exciting thing.
That's great. That's great to hear. As you know, we are here to talk about Euripides' Medea, first produced in 431 BCE. I have already introduced our listeners to really just the bare bones of this extraordinarily powerful and influential play. I've mentioned just a few of the ways we might think of it briefly. I would love to hear from you what you think Medea is about. That's a very big question. But what for you is really important in Medea? What is it about? What are some of its central themes or questions?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. It's also a hard question because,
Yeah.
as you know better than anyone, this is a 1,400 line play that is rich in a lot of topics. But for me, I like to boil it down to the essence, especially the narrative essence. And for me, this is a revenge plot at its fundamental narrative core. That puts it in line with Homer's Iliad, Aeschylus's Agamemnon, stories of those who have been wronged and then spend most of the kind of narrative playing that out, seeing how the score can be settled. That involves a lot of rhetoric, as we'll see, a lot of ways of situating what is this wrong and how can it be addressed from a personal level, from a social level. But the thing that makes Medea so interesting to me is that the question of revenge is completely connected to the question of identity. Who is Medea? And when I'm talking about the Iliad, talking about Agamemnon, we're thinking about Bronze Age heroes, male heroes. And Medea doesn't fit that mold exactly, but in some ways she does. So I think so much of Medea as the play that, as you were saying, first produced by Euripides in 431, but then also its reception into Seneca, in the Roman era, and then beyond, has been very concerned with who is Medea? How does she fit within the structure of the play, but then also the society of Greece that we're imagining, Greece and Colchis, modern Georgia on the eastern end of the Black Sea. But for anyone who's watching or reading this play for the first time, they are mapping this primal revenge narrative onto their own lived experience of being an other, being an outsider. So it refracts in these myriad ways. And I think we could get hung up by thinking that Medea has to be a princess from Colchis. She's whatever, the audience is going to see her as. So for me, that's it. Revenge, but with a soupçon or more of identity.
A soupçon or more of identity. I like that. Yeah, it really is a revenge plot, and you're right that then that can be received in so many different ways by different audiences, and Medea's character is multivalent, maybe for that very reason. So maybe we can talk about her character a bit more. She's a
Yeah, let's
very
get into it.
complex, yeah, a very complex character to understand. This woman who kills her own children in revenge for her husband, but that makes it sound far more simple, really, than it might be to just think of it purely in terms of a sort of simple idea of revenge. Um, she's complex because she crosses so many boundaries, right? We can't actually categorize her. I called her multivalent. She's from Colchis, so she's foreign in the sense of not being exactly Greek. She's also Greek,
Mhm.
and she behaves in both maybe a stereotypically foreign way for an Athenian audience, but also in very much a Greek way. She's female, she's a mother, but she also acts like a man. She's human, but maybe she's God.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
there are all of these ways to think of her and to present her. She's a monstrous woman, but we also feel compassion for her. Um, what do you think? I mean, how do you present Medea to your students um, as a character, and which parts do you think stand out the most?
Yeah, how do you solve a problem like Medea, right? This is a complex character. Um, One thing that has interested me, and especially in teaching this, but anyone who sees this, is how do we identify with this character? As much as it's about her identity as a figure, it's also about the ways that she's connecting with internal audiences, the women of Corinth, with other leaders like the King Aegeus of Athens, who makes a little cameo. Um, whether we see her favorably or negatively, cuts across all of these kind of dichotomies that you were pointing out. So in some ways, and we've talked about this before, she's kind of a worst nightmare of the Athenian imagination, this foreign woman who is threatening, questions of uh, patrilineal descent, order, all of these things. In many ways, she is just so multivalently other that it would be easy to dismiss. But this is the problem with Greek drama and in some ways Greek myth generally, is you would like to think that there are easy solutions to those problems. And if somebody is, bad on multiple fronts, they're completely bad. But then you look at the Olympian deities and, Zeus is the god of justice, and yet he interacts with others in ways that are kind of patently unjust in many respects. So we can kind of take some of that complexity that we just see as part of Greek storytelling and Greek religious belief and see it in Medea's character. So for all the reasons that you said, those binaries don't necessarily apply. We're oscillating between them. She is a man and then she's a woman. She's a foreigner, but then she's Greek. And she as a character, and this is kind of Euripides' brilliance in this, is able to play upon that. She can lean into stereotypes. Jason can believe that she's both a horrible, monstrous wife, but then can also see, oh, she is a woman who is contrite and behaving as he would expect women to do. So is she the worst nightmare? Yes. I think it's hard to point out a badder, more evil Greek heroine from our tragedies. So and that's what makes her so compelling. But then all of Greek drama, as it's acted by men, scripted by men for audiences that must, in my opinion, have included women, but still were probably normatively male in their outlook. Um, this is a cipher for ways that men are thinking about their strategies and problems in their own life. So one could imagine, and there have been productions of these things with all male casts, since antiquity, all male audiences, and they're seeing something in Medea too, that gender becomes, one aspect of it, but it's something that can be, complicated. There was an interesting Japanese production that toured recently where we have men vocalizing the roles that are being played by women. So, there's ways of splitting, even in performance, some of these questions. So I like to focus maybe as to wrap this up on the positives of Medea. A brilliant woman, strategic, learned, royal, but with a sense that she really can connect with people, that she's, conversant across cultures, across languages, outside of the one fatal transgressive deed and maybe some kind of duplicity. There's a lot to admire in this character, and I think that comes across on the page as well as on the stage in almost every production.
Yeah, I think so too. And without fail, every single time I teach Medea and we talk about her famous Woman of Corinth speech, I dwell on the famous lines about how she'd rather stand in battle multiple times than give birth once. And I think, yeah, Medea. And I think a lot of other people feel like that too. So it is remarkable that this woman who is constructed by by men, largely for men, has that element to her. And I like your approach to find the positives in this complex woman. Um, some of what you've said leads me to the next question, although it is a
Mhm.
little bit different. But I would love us to talk a bit about the performance of this play. Well, you've already mentioned one example of a modern performance. Um, but if we could dwell a bit more on the performance aspects, its costumes, its masks, various stagings, movements on stage, scenery, music, um, forms of theatre technology that go beyond all of those things. You, of course, have extensive experience in dramaturgy, so you're uniquely placed to talk about this stuff. What do you think are the most interesting aspects of Medea from a performance perspective? And how might we relate some of what we've just been saying about Medea as a character and the central issues of the play to aspects of its performance?
Yeah, good questions that I've grappled with for a long time in the abstract, because I should say at the outset, I've never attempted to mount a production of Medea because the challenges it presents, even if you're not doing an ancient practices production, are significant. You have to have an actor or actress who can carry this role. The supporting roles, always the Greek chorus poses problems. So, translating this to a modern audience reception is a challenge that needs creative solutions that I haven't felt myself up for yet. But maybe we can start with the ancient apparatus and then see where, that's going to be affecting both the plot as we have it and some of these more thematic questions that are going to, occur whether or not you're wearing a mask or not. But yes, basic details, all male cast, three, actors, presumably, playing all of the speaking roles so that some of these are doubled. A character will wear one mask, read as Jason, go backstage and come out as Aegeus or someone else later in the play. These are helmet masks, not just face, so you have hair. And with that, you presumably can, suggest a bit of different aspects of identity. The foreignness of Medea, we don't know exactly how this would be represented because there's a way that the past was a foreign country in 5th century Attic drama, where the men that you were seeing, the male characters you were seeing on stage, did not really look like the men you would see on the streets of Athens at the same time. They looked somewhat foreign. They looked Eastern. They had this exotic, ornate dress. So the way that you would, be able to code Medea as female, even though there's a male actor underneath, and as foreign when everyone already seems like they're dressing in a kind of sumptuous Eastern fashion, is a complication that they must have had some way of figuring out. We don't have direct evidence for how this play looked, but we do have an amazing South Italian giant crater that's that's a big mixing vessel vase. It's in the Cleveland Museum of Art, and it shows Medea wearing a kind of ethnically distinctive cap on, spoiler alert, the chariot of the sun with which she escapes with her children. It's not a perfect match for Euripides. There's a lot of points where you could say this isn't quite the text as we have it, but you do get a sense of just the awe that can be inspired by costume. Not just costume here, because this is Medea at the end of the play using a device that's typically reserved for divine appearances. And this is, of course, the ex machina, or apomekanes, as they said in ancient Greece, the god from the machine. This machine has different names. Sometimes it would be a geronos, a crane, but this is some device, and it's much debated in the scholarship, that could bring in an actor from on high to visually, scenically, kind of mechanistically represent this detachment that the character has from the lower mortal realm. We think we see this with Socrates and Aristophanes' clouds being presented again from on high. We don't have recordings of these things. We don't know exactly. We're inferring a lot from the script, so that can lead to some circularity. But even putting all those things aside, this exit of Medea, exit from the play, but she's returning to the stage with the lifeless bodies of her children. Again, how they're staging these things, physically separated. That's a certain guarantee from the text that Jason is unable to touch her, to touch his children. Of course, he would like to throttle her and caress his children, and these are things that are prevented from him. All of this is going to be reinforced by the staging, which is, they're wearing these masks. They've got these large, ornate costumes. They can't really move. I think some of the best comparative work can be in kind of the No tradition of Japanese theater for just these ornate costumes, these stylized gestures. I'm sure there are many points of departure, and we don't want to think of ancient Greek drama simply through the lens of No, but getting away from the realism of the kind of modern Western theatrical tradition is really valuable for getting a sense of just how awe-inspiring some of these characters can be. I have to imagine that Euripides Medea held the audience with a slow turn of the mask and a delay before, as much as what is written on the page is compelling, a pregnant pause from a skilled actor at these moments when everyone kind of knows what's going to happen, although there's some debate about will she kill her kids, will she not, how much was that baked into the myth. Everyone knows she's going to be violent and transgressive. So lingering on those moments and using everything that's available in the production apparatus to make that happen, this had to be a stunning show. It didn't win first prize. We know that about it. Somebody walked away, but from the very beginning, this was a hit, and we know that because it's one of the textbook plays of Euripides to survive. We have more from Euripides than anyone else, but some of that's kind of a historical accident where we got a selection of the alphabet, the so-called alphabet plays, that give us a nice, check on these things. But we know that Medea was popular, which gets us back to that point of how could they hate her if they liked this play so much? There was something about this that people found attractive, both in performance and purely in text.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that you're emphasizing that it's not just the text that secures its popularity, but the performance, which of course is informed by the text over time in various different ways. But this can be a really spectacular performance. I also love that you dwelt on the Deus ex machina, the end of the play, where Medea transcends the human plane entirely. Again, this sort of uncategorizable figure. And we could also think about her entrance, right, as well, where um, we first hear her off stage, and maybe she conforms to some stereotypes of a woman and a foreigner because she's just crying and she's emotionally excessive. And then when she comes on stage, she has this just rhetorically magnificent speech. So again, in terms of defying any easy categorization.
Yeah, and we have this in 431. Euripides is an established playwright. We don't have much from before this. We have Alcestis, we maybe have Cyclops, but then a couple years after, we'll have Hippolytus, where we have another badly behaving woman, Phaedra, who also has some offstage screams, and there's illness and kind of concern for the frailty of female characters who are dead or dying socially or physically. But wow, does Medea turn this one around.
Yeah. Yes, that's an understatement. Um, that's great. Well, we should begin to wrap up, but I finally would really like to hear from you about a little bit about Medea's performance history or reception history, and you've already alluded to this. I mean, I know that you work on the reception histories of Greek tragedy and comedy. Do you have a favorite adaptation of Medea or a reworking of Medea, or maybe a few? This, as I say, has been an incredibly rich performance history for this play, perhaps more than any other.
Yeah, well, I checked on this, Naomi, because I was interested, to what extent is this a top reception play? And for this, one can go to the archive for the performances of Greek and Roman drama, this Oxford initiated and really kind of storied project, one of these digital humanities collaborative projects that was way ahead of its time. And I checked against Antigone, Oedipus, the other heavy hitters of the college kind of curriculum of when people think of a Greek drama, what do they think of? Medea outstrips them all in terms of performances over the past 150 years. That's telling on a lot of fronts. Obviously, that's women's suffrage and then women's liberation movements, on an ongoing project. So this play has been particularly relevant now, but we also hear it referenced and name-checked, and lines are quoted from antiquity on. So this does have a certain staying power, which makes your question, "What's your favorite, Al?" Very
Sorry.
hard to answer. So because I was thinking about this, I settled on 3. It's a trilogy, and I hope you'll allow me to do this. The first was the first Medea I ever saw, which was the Fiona Shaw Abbey Theatre production, which toured to the,
I
university
saw that
when
too.
I was a, undergraduate. And it was incredible. Fiona Shaw, whom some of your listeners might know as Mrs. Dursley from the original Harry Potter, filmic adaptations, was the title character, and it was all very modernized. She enters at one stage or exits in a limousine. There's no dragon wagon. The kind of mysterious, the mythical is somewhat stripped down. But gosh, the offstage murders of her children were striking, and this was a big house that was riveted by this play. I also, a couple of years back, saw an original practices production at Randolph College in Lynchburg, Virginia. This is run by a woman, Dr. Amy R. Cohen, who just does wonderful things in this historical theater that has now basically a century's worth of Greek revival productions. Outdoors in the original style. This was happening during the Kavanaugh hearings for the U.S., the appointment to the Supreme Court. And this was during the wave of the Me Too movement. And this was, there was nothing done in this show to make it contemporary. Everything was in some ways going as far back as possible, but reflecting the realities of, the demographics of the student population at this school. It was a Black Medea, and there's been a lot of ways that people have talked about the kind of globalized post-colonial or colonial receptions of this play, and Blackness and otherness has really been a part of the Medea story, at least in the last 50 years across the world, especially in America, given its own racial history. That was a startlingly powerful production, even though everyone kind of has bobbleheads and it's strange to see, and it was amateur, but it was electric because of that moment. Last but not least, the Rhodessa Jones Medea Project, this Bay Area outgrowth of this Cultural Odyssey series that Rhodessa Jones, a really talented, multi-talented artist, has put together with incarcerated women whom she has met, either in the prisons or after they've gotten out of prison, to do the kind of social work of theater together. We had them come out to Chapel Hill on the eve of the COVID pandemic. We got them in just under the line. And that production was wide-ranging and was taking quotes and scenes from Medea, but interweaving them with a lot of personal narrative, which made the ancient myth really come alive. So those are the three that I've seen. If I had to pick one that our audience could go out and read, there's Cherry Moraga's Hungry Woman, which is an interesting adaptation. But if I had to pick one, it's going to be Luis Alfaro's Mojada. I shouldn't say that word because it means wetback. It's an insult, but this is a Mexican Medea that he has kind of grafted on to the immigrant experience in America. As we're recording this in 2026, that's highly relevant. It's a remarkable play to read, and I have yet to see it, but that's on the bucket list.
Yeah, for me too, but I'm teaching it in just a month's time. And actually, we were talking about the Deus Ex Machina scene, and I'm endlessly fascinated by how Alfaro deals with that scene at the end of that play, Mojada,
Yeah,
where the
it leaves my students shook, as they say, but we won't, no spoilers for the audience.
okay, no spoilers. Um, That's wonderful, Al. We really have benefited so much from these insights of yours on this difficult, amazing play. So thank you so much for joining us on Ancient Greece Today.
It's been my pleasure. I look forward to the entire series.
I really enjoyed that chat with Al, and I hope you did too. Now, when I spoke with him, I hadn't actually yet arranged the second interview for this episode, but when Al mentioned Rhodessa Jones and the Medea Project, I got really excited. Perhaps I could speak with her. So I reached out, and I had the privilege of talking to her a few weeks later. Here is that interview. So I'm very honored to be joined by performer, teacher, and director Rhodessa Jones. In addition to producing very important solo work, Rhodessa has been the co-artistic director, along with Idris Akamor, of Cultural Odyssey, a performing arts organization based in San Francisco since 1979. In 1989, she founded the Medea Project, Theatre for Incarcerated Women, and has been its director ever since. This is a community-based program serving female inmates, ex-inmates, HIV-positive women, college students, and many other participants across the
Social
US.
workers, there are a lot of wonderful women have been through the program. Yeah.
And it's been going strong for almost 50 years, as
Yes.
we were just saying. So, Rhodessa, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Oh, you're welcome.
I know that you have been asked this question many, many times over the years, but could you first tell us about how the Medea Project began?
Well, I got a call from the California Arts Council, which is a large funding agency for artists, and I had been working in the jails, and they asked me would I work with women teaching aerobics. I said, "Okay, well, that's interesting." And but once I hung out my little flag or whatever, I had at one point I had 40 women, and they were there. They were angry as hell, but they were there, and I was quite green then, quite green, and, uh, and I said, "Well, I want you to tell me how you got your name." And it would always go back to misunderstandings with her mother or being abandoned and left to sexual assault with her stepfather, even her father. And I thought, this is amazing. This is just incredible. And before I knew it, I was in the shower one morning. I thought, well, I should make a theater program and find a way to get these women to tell their stories because so many women are left to the side. But here we have the incarcerated woman, which is a whole other woman that lives on the edge. And I said to them, "What happened to you?" I said, "I don't want to hear what the judge did or what your mother did, but what do you think happened to your life? How was it derailed?" And this was early days. And of course, because a lot of them were very young, they said, "Derailed? What does that mean?" I said, "Well, when you fall off the track." And they were like, "Hmm." And then they want me to criticize them. But I'm sitting in, the jail. One morning, I get there, and I'm waiting for the deputies to gather these women, and all of a sudden, there's this incredible hubbub, and women are grinding their teeth, and they're being held back by officers, and I'm like, "What the hell is happening here?" And, one woman said, "Let me get her. I just wanna tear her. I want her to feel what that baby felt." And all of a sudden, it all started coming back to me. Oh, and this one woman said, "Yeah, she kills her baby." And that woman had killed her baby because her husband told her after they started doing cocaine, he told her he wanted her out. He wanted her gone. He just wanted his kid, right? And this woman had been to Berkeley. The mother, she had studied, graduated from Berkeley, the university. And he said, It's over for you. The corner don't want you." He said, "You're shot. It's done. And I just want my baby out of this MF." And she said, from what the deputies told me, she said, "Well, give me 1 day and then I'll be gone." And what happened was that he was a bus driver. She was actually a chemist. And he went to work and she smothered the baby. She smothered the baby in revenge. A little girl, and she had gone mute. This woman couldn't talk anymore. And all of this is coming at me. I'm thinking about um, Ellen Burstyn and Melina McCurry, and I think it was a beautiful a dream remembered or something like that. That was the name of it. And it was based on one woman who had been an actress and the other woman who had lived in Greece. And her husband left her and she killed her child. And then I saw Pasolini's Medea with not Melina Mer what is the actress, the singer, the opera
Um,
singer?
Maria Callas.
Yes, there's a fabulous if you've never see this movie, and all of a sudden, information is coming to me and feelings. I had a baby at 16, you know, and the father tried to talk his way out of it, but my mother is a witch herself. She said, "Oh, no, 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 this is your child, blah, blah, blah." When he said, "Well, send me to jail because I'm not gonna marry anybody." And I was devastated because I just thought this boy and I'll get married and we'll have this baby, blah, blah, blah. But sitting in that waiting room that morning, all of these images and stories and songs and sadness came clouding down, just crowded down on me. And I thought, well, what can I do? What can I do? I am an artist, right? So I thought I'm gonna make a place for women to tell their stories. And I began by getting women to answer questions like, what should we know about you? And so many women said, "What do you mean, know about me?" I said, "You were not always a convict. You were not always an addict. You were not always a thief, a forager. What can I know about you?" And some of the women had the most beautiful names that their mothers had given them. And the other side of it that was really interesting was that the women wanted me to understand that their mothers weren't in the life. Now, my mother is with my kids, they'd say. My mother is straight, they'd say. And all of this, I'm trying to write it down and word gets out that I'm doing this. And social workers, people that I know who are working in social justice, they asked me, could they come? I said, "Can we come?" And I was a little afraid because I thought I didn't want the women to feel like they were under some sort of a microscope. But they started to come, and we realized a lot of women couldn't read, but they liked writing and they loved storytelling and they loved dancing and moving. And I started to organize my classes in such a way that, like I, as an artist, I warm up, I dance, I sing, all of this before I proceed to stand very straight and very tall and tell a story. And I watched this thing start to grow. And I didn't even know what I could do because we're at the county jail now. Remember that? I went to Mike Hennessy, who at that time was the chief sheriff, and I asked him, could I work with women and make a play and invite people in to see it? And the first time it was a nightmare because we had this small group of women, and I didn't realize that I had been asked to come in and work with women because more women were going to jail than ever before, and nobody could figure out what can we do. And but the men knew the women. There was probably 60 men in this room, and these women are now they're dancing for the men and they're shaking their breasts and they're competing with each other. And a man said, he said, this is important, y'all. He said, this is important work. You shouldn't throw it away. And I started again. I said, okay, we're going to start again. And we were an hour late because I said, we're going to do this again. And the guy said, no, tell us about yourself. Tell us about what happened to you. And again, it was men and women, right? But the men were in a lot of ways, they were almost frightened of these women because the women were they didn't care. They just didn't give a damn. And they were scary to look at, a lot of them. But they started coming back to the class and I talked about what could have been better, and I let them talk about what could have been better, and the Medea Project started to grow. I still hadn't, approached the sheriff about getting I wanted to take them out of the jails. That was my fantasy, little me, and he said, "Oh," and he's listening. He's like, "Oh, San Francisco is very, very famous for the fact that where we as a community are always trying to open a way, doing something more experimental." And I told him what I thought could happen because two of my brothers were cops at that time. And my brother Steve said, well, there is a welfare fund for the sheriffs and the deputies. And if you can get some of that money, we can hire people on the side to come in and be with you. And it was so funny. At first, I thought maybe I'll have men and women. But no, no, no. But anyways, I had people come in dressed as their fantasy cops. I wish I had videotaped it. There was some amazing men and women who came in with the sunglasses on, and I said, "No." I said, "Walk like you walk down the halls of the city jail." And they were, like, strutting around and all this stuff, and there were lots of people who worked theater. They were deputies, but they did theater, and they started to volunteer to help, and costume designers, and it just kinda flourished, the project, and now it's been, almost 50 years since I've been doing it, yeah.
Yeah, that's
And I've done it in Africa, I've done it in Jamaica, I've done it in Trinidad, I've done it all over Europe, but Africa was the most amazing. It was the most amazing time that I actually 'cause they were the deputies, they're called wardens in South Africa, but they wanted to tell their own stories.
mm,
They asked me, they said, "Well, can we tell our stories?" These women were divorced, they were married to a man who was also in working in the jails, and they said, "Well, can we talk? Can we talk about how we'd like for our lives to change?" And then the pandemic hit, and I've never gotten back. But I'd like to see what I could do if I went back and start working with deputies and their wives and that kind of thing. But no, that was a short version, but that's how it kind of came together. Yeah.
well, yeah, this is incredible to hear how this all began and how storytelling is at its very heart.
And
Um,
Medea,
and
I
Medea,
said, we're
yeah,
going to call it Medea. We're going to call it the
yeah.
Medea Project.
So,
Yeah.
obviously, there's a connection in terms of uh, sort of the woman that you encountered and the things that were going on in your life, and seeing Pasolini's film. But um, how did Medea, as a figure of myth, as a figure of theatre, stay with you, or to what extent did she stay with you for this project? I know that you did an adaptation of
Yes, and it
Medea
was
as a
called
play.
Realities Just Outside the Window. That
Yeah.
was the name of the show. No, I realized that it was an ancient myth. It was a mirror.
Mm,
Women were telling the same stories, the same heartbreaking stories of being betrayed, left, made to hold the bag of money or dope, and then he leaves her for a younger woman or, somebody that can roll with him, as they say. And I was just amazed at how they were angry, and I'd have to say, "Wait a minute, who are you angry with?" And I had a social worker who I met inside. She was there, and she said, "We're here with you." She said, "So you're angry at us?" And first of all, I saw women deal with the word angry. "Am I angry?" You could see them going, "Am I mad?" And then there'd be women who say, "Well, they took my kids." "Did they take your kids, or did you give your kids away?" And I didn't realize that when the state approached me about doing this work, I didn't realize that so many more women were in jail than they'd ever seen before. Because we're supposed to be good girls. Good girls are quiet,
mm,
they don't make a lot of noise, and God knows they don't go to jail and they don't do drugs, but that was a very it stuck with me. I was thinking and I wanted to leave a few times because, oh my god, it was just so hard with the deputies because they didn't get it for a long time.
mm,
Why are you allowed to take all these women to the gym, and they just said they get to jump around and act crazy, and, I thought, "I can't do this." But my friends, the women that I know, the actresses, the writers, the, um, the playwrights, they would say, "Rhodessa, you have to keep doing this work." And gradually, I started to see through their gaze, how important it was, and the women started to really miss me if there was a holiday. They'd see me. You're not supposed to touch in jail, you're not supposed to do any of that. They would just run up and almost knock me down,
mm,
holding me, and they were so happy to see me again, and they would say, "We thought you were gonna leave us. Everybody leaves us." And no, to answer your question, it started to stick like almost like glue that, Odessa, this is something that you've been sent to do. You
Mhm.
have to do this work. And when I think about Medea, I say, it's not, looking at the classics and reading them. Medea is me, and I am Medea because art saved my life. It was theater that found me a place to stand, gave me a voice. And what I realized too was that I really want these women to find their voice. I
Mhm.
really want them to scream, yell, talk about how angry you are. But no, everything around me, especially in a jail, you think about a jail, it's like being stuck in a shell or a room.
Mm.
And everywhere I turned, I thought, no, this work is so important. And women are all of us. I just did a Medea performance, oh my God, 4 months ago at Brava, which is the big women's theater center here. And I invited so many of my straight neighbors to come because they know me and they know I do theater and they've seen some of my work. But the one woman across the street, she's a probate lawyer. And she came over, she said, I just have to tell you that it dawned on me that we're more alike than unlike.
Mhm.
The struggles that the women talked about, the loss that they've had to deal with. She says it's really interesting where at one point you think, "Oh, they're the bad people." She said, "But no, we're not bad. Everybody is spinning and churning in their head and trying to make sense of their lives, good or bad. What's happening?" And we lose weight, we go to the gym, we, we do what we can to hold him. And if you're lucky, your kid has a mom and a dad, and the kids are raised properly. Is that a good way to put it? But no, all of these things,
Yeah, I can see in what you're saying how apt or useful a figure Medea is for
Mhm.
standing for somebody who is initially for an audience maybe like your neighbor so alienating and unfamiliar and
Right.
even abhorrent, and then uh, certainly modern audiences then find these, and especially women, find these deep connections with her and are drawn into her and then feel this
And I
sense
love
of connection
women.
with, yeah, with
The
women who
sister
we
girl
might
thing
seem
with
different from.
women, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Um, how do you see the legacy of the Medea Project? Do you see it living on through through storytelling and
Storytelling, I have, an aspect of the company, a platform, the Medea Academy, and so I have one ex-offender now, she's got a BA, and she's already teaching, and I'm mentoring her with what I know. And then I work with women with HIV, and the Medea Project, the whole idea of telling the truth and shaming the devil has helped so many women come out and say, "Yes, I'm HIV positive. I am doing this, I'm doing that." So I think that at best, it may live on past me. It may, because I'm 77 now. I'm 77 years old. So I think that I'm hoping that it will have a long life as part of women's studies, as part of um, uh, uh, the whole idea that it brings the incarcerated woman closer to the middle. And she has, because I just think that there's a lot to learn. High school kids, girls, learning about ourselves and what we're capable of and what we should stay away from. And how do you save your own life through the creative process? You see, that's another thing that I work really closely at. But I hope that I have a long life. That's my fantasy. Yeah.
well, I hope I very much hope that too. Um, Thank you so much for speaking with me about all of this. One of the phrases that's going to stay with me that you used early on in our conversation is "woman on the edge." And I'm going to think about that a lot. It's actually very appropriate for Medea
Yes,
herself.
it is.
And
Medea brought me a long way, as far as like she's a sister consciousness,
Mm,
and it isn't that I say again, it isn't ancient history. It's the mirror. We're still, here in California. I've been gone off and on, but in California, maybe it's not even, maybe it's DC. There's a whole talk of married women not being able to vote.
mhm.
Oh, how dare you, whomever is putting this garbage out there. We need women more than ever. We need women, and women need to realize that we need each other, and we have a voice that's very powerful and important. And the Medea Project, the story of Medea has given it so many wings and legs,
Mm,
that women are not alone,
yeah.
and that we can do so many things. We can do so many things.
Well, that is a wonderful note to end on. So thank you
Yes, well,
so
thank you
much
for
for
having
speaking
me.
with me. There are so many uses and adaptations of Medea in modern times. In my classes, I like to talk about, for example, burlesque versions of Medea in the late 1800s in Britain, where she stands for the deserted, pitiful wife at a time when women's unequal status in marriage was being publicly debated. Or Toni Morrison's Beloved, where the tragedy is one among several traditions reworked to explore the painful relationship between motherhood, sexual violence, and loss among Black enslaved communities in antebellum America. Or Jesmyn Ward's 2011 novel, Salvage the Bones, set within a Black community in the Mississippi Gulf over a few days leading up to Hurricane Katrina, where multiple characters become Medea. There's the protagonist, Esh, a 15-year-old who's just realized she's pregnant, a prize fighting dog called China, who's just given birth to a litter, and Hurricane Katrina itself, or herself, arriving as a deus ex machina. But Rhodessa Jones, in her work and in her interview, really very powerfully made me, I think has made us, think about Medea as a figure and story that's not so far away. Sure, Euripides' play itself isn't at the heart of the Medea Project, but Medea is there, this woman living on the edge, crossing boundaries, seemingly alien but then deeply human. Well, that is it on Medea, but a reminder that you can find reading recommendations and other resources on the podcast website at podcast.chs.harvard.edu. You can also find information there, by the way, about the music on this podcast, which is composed by my colleague, Professor David Elmer, here at Harvard, all of it based on surviving fragments of ancient Greek music. Next episode, we'll talk about Bacchae, a very different play from Medea. I'll be talking to Dr. Lucy Jackson from Durham University and the poet Monica Yoon. Do join me.